Alright, welcome back, grade 9s. This is our final lesson on Inside the Justice System, Chapter 2 of our textbook, and just gives us a last chance to take a look at our online lesson, Lesson 4, that can be found in our digital textbook. Today we'll also have an opportunity to review some of the big rocks of this lesson and this chapter before our evaluation on Monday. Now, Monday is not an exam, it's an evaluation. But what the evaluations are doing for me right now is giving me feedback so that I can best determine which stream you are in. And then once we get to the exam, which exams you should be writing. So this lesson, Lesson 4, began with a look at the concept that justice is blind. And I've already put that on the midterm. I've already put that on the exam. So if you don't see it Monday, you will see it on the test, because I think it's a pretty major concept, the idea that justice is meant to be objective and impartial. We also tried to look at what is justice. We defined it through a variety of means, including the most simple, just applying the laws and applying laws fairly. But one thing I'd like to show you here is that in the digital textbook in Lesson 4, Inside the Justice System, there's these notes that we've gone through, and today we're going to go through the Quizlet. So in these lessons, for each chapter, there will be a link to a chapter review, and that's a good way to see what I would call the big rocks of the chapter. So we are going to look at some definitions, and then we'll see the terms. So this means governed by rules that apply to everyone, taking into account individual needs and circumstances. So again, this is a link that you can do on your own from home. So the link's right there in our online lesson. And we're just going to go through these together before the break and see how well we can do. So for each one of these, at your desk, maybe just see if you can predict what the term might be. A term that means to be governed by rules that apply to everyone, taking into account individual needs and circumstances. So this is some language, some vocabulary we've encountered in this chapter, during this lesson. Anybody think that they might know this term or this phrase? It means to be governed by rules that apply to everyone, but we're also going to take into account individual needs and circumstances. So everyone has the same rules, but we're going to take into account individual needs and circumstances. This is one of the big things we talked about in this unit. This is the idea of applying laws. So we're applying some laws. The institutions and procedures for applying laws in a society. What do we call the institutions and procedures that apply laws? Yes? Maybe the justice system. That would make sense. Oh, sorry, I gotta flip it. I gotta flip it for the answer. I messed up. Switch front and back side. Justice system. There we go. Next up, now that I've flipped it, now it's going to give us the term legislation. Now we can try to predict what is legislation? What does that term mean? It's legislation. So by all means, you can use your notebook, you can use your textbook, you can flip through there. Legislation. So even in chapter 1, we talked about the 3 branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. And the legislative branch, one of the roles that they have is they create legislation. Do you have another name or another term to describe legislation?
Legislation.
And that's how you say legislation. That's a cool feature.
Legislation.
Her voice is much better than mine to listen to. She doesn't have a mask on, that probably helps. And then when you're reviewing these at home, if there's a term like, I didn't get it the first time, put a little star next to it so that you know which ones to review the second time. So what is legislation? Flipping it. These are laws created through the legislative process. So one of the first steps in social studies in order to be able to critically and analytically connect with and dissect the language of the course and the ideas of the course, we must first know what the words mean. So there is some road work to do in terms of language building. Next word, validity. What does it mean if something has validity?
Validity.
Man, she's way better than I. Validity.
Validity.
Validity. So validity, what might that mean? Well, that's reliability. That's based on critical assessment of source facts and bias. So, what is the validity of the witness? You know, what's the validity of the statement? Is something that the executive branch would have to be considering as they're enforcing the law, and it's something that the judicial branch would have to consider as they are hearing the law being tried. So in a court situation, the judge or jury may have to look at the validity of what's being presented. Is this reliable? Can I trust this? Can I trust this? So yesterday we looked at a case where there was an individual named JR from Medicine Hat, 12 years old, that was involved in the gruesome slaying of her family. What if there was a witness that said, no, she was at the Dairy Queen with me. And then they're like, okay, well, give us some details. What time was that? It was nighttime. Well, can you be more specific? Not really. How do you know it was her that you saw at the Dairy Queen? What was she wearing? I want to say she was wearing jeans and a white shirt. Okay. Did anybody, do you have any other evidence that makes it seem more plausible, more reliable, more valid that you actually saw her? Give us some details. There's another famous case, and it was actually a case in Ontario that really got this whole young offenders movement and young offenders act started, and that was the trial of Stephen Truscott. And Stephen Truscott was on trial for the murder of a classmate, a schoolmate. She was younger, and the prosecution during the trial, they questioned the validity of the statements of the children, because they're like, oh, these children, their memory's not as forged, and maybe they're fabricating stuff because they don't know the seriousness of a court situation, that they're not allowed to lie under oath, and therefore they questioned things that even when the children were reporting about a car that they saw her get into, and the children are like, oh, it's this kind of car because I could tell because of the headlights, the tail lights. The court didn't want to see the reliability of that. The kids might know and be able to identify different cars based upon details like, oh, they have different taillights. But in hindsight, you can distinguish cars by taillights. And at the distance that the children were from the highway that they were seeing, it's plausible that they did see someone else that could have committed the murder instead of Stephen Truscott. So they have to look at reliability. They have to look critically at the source and the facts and the bias that could be included. Maybe there is a bias. Maybe I say I saw JR at the Dairy Queen because she's my friend and I'm covering for her. So that's something that they have to look at in terms of validity. Next up, let's look at the term of the next one, or the definition, and see if we can come up with the term. So if you're at home and you're like, man, I don't know some of those words.
Help in the community performed as part of a sentence, such as assisting with a community cleanup or food bank.
So if you have troubles reading at home, you can have it read to you. This Quizlet has that audio built in. So you can have it read to you, and then you can look at it and say, okay, these are the terms we looked at this year. You can even be looking in your textbook for the bolded terms. What word might that be? So, help in community performed as part of a sentence. So you've done some wrongdoing, now you have to help in the community, yes?
Community service.
Community service. So then we flip the card.
Community service.
Boom, there we go. So there will be Quizlets for all the chapters embedded in our lessons. We're just going through chapter 2 today, looking at some of the big rocks, some of the language, On Monday, you'll see some multiple choice, less than last time. We had 42 last time. We're just going to have a few this time. And then we'll have that other assignment that I've already showed you. And I'll show you again before we leave today. That one cartoon that I'm going to get you to use the cartoon to basically show me that you understand this chapter. And we'll look at that, the last thing we do today. So next term, criminal record. So criminal record seems to be a pretty common word, like, you know, everyone's heard of it. It'll be interesting to see, well, how do they define that? It's a permanent record of breaking the law, which is public information. So a criminal record is public, and that's one of the reasons why young offenders typically don't have a criminal record, you know, a full criminal record, because they're protecting the youth. A criminal record can bar you from certain jobs like teaching, volunteer jobs, and volunteer positions, and even traveling to other countries. So if you have a criminal record, the United States won't let you into the United States. All right, let's go to the next definition, and we'll see if we can come up with the term. A consequence for crime, such as imprisonment, determined by a court of law. Yes?
Sentence.
This might be a sentence. So let's flip the card over. You just use this little icon there, and it is
Sentence.
sentence. Maybe this is just a fun game because you get to listen to her say
Sentence.
and you know, there's something there. There's something. Next up, rehabilitate. So rehabilitate's the word. Then what's the definition? What does it mean to rehabilitate? So we talked about rehabilitation and deterrence and retribution and reasonable consequences. There's language that's been delivered out this week to you in this chapter. And before you can respond to multiple choice question, if the word rehabilitate is in it, you need to know what that means. What does it mean to rehabilitate? Now, yesterday we looked at the story of JR and we tried to see, was she rehabilitated? You know, to the extent that she should be allowed to be free of a curfew. So rehabilitate, what does it mean? We flip the card over, boom.
To instill positive behaviors and attitudes.
So it's a part of that reintroducing Canadian values, Canadian attitudes, so that you can be a part of a community and you won't be a threat to the community. You know, what's the chances of you committing the crime again? It's always a part of the equation when they're trying to decide on to what extent you should be free. And the answer is, have you been rehabilitated? You know, do we need to fear a repeat of the same kind of wrongdoing? Will you commit the crime again? Reintegrate. So yesterday with the JR story, talking about how do we reintegrate her? Well, it's those steps, right? She didn't go from being locked up to being absolutely free. There were some steps along the way, including being at a group home, and then having a curfew, and having to check in. So let's see their definition of reintegrate. To make part of again. How do we make you a part of society again? What can we do so that the young offender can be part of their community again? So let's say in the future, you are in a courtroom. Maybe you're just there as an observer, right? You went there to watch the proceedings. And the judge introduces the prosecution. What's the job of the prosecution? Whose side are they on? Are they trying to convict the accused? Or are they trying to get the accused set free? What's the job of the prosecution? Whose side are they on? They're on the side of conviction, right? So prosecution in Canada represents the Crown. That's why they're called Crown prosecutors. And it's their job to prove guilt. Because in Canada, we're innocent until proven guilty. So it's the job of the prosecution to prove guilt. Here's the evidence, here's the case that proves some guilt. So they're the ones that are trying to prove that something wrong has been done. So the evidence that supports the guilt of an accused person and those presenting that evidence. So again, on Monday, you'll have a chance to wrestle with some of this language. And the neat thing is, all of this is found right here in our online lesson. Everything we're going to do this year is going to be digital. Now, I say that, and I have a handout for you today, but the handout, there's a digital link to it on the online lessons because half of our class is in here. Now, I'd like to assume that that half is working at home, but I see no evidence of that. So if you happen to find yourself sick, then there's stuff you can do at home. You can follow along with us. Google Classroom, each day I post in there what we're up to, and therefore you don't have to feel that, oh no, if I get sick, I'm gonna fall behind. I've already lost months of schooling last year. I can't miss another year. I'll be delayed. You don't have to worry about that. We'll keep you up to date. So what word means to sequester? To sequester means to remove from contact. Juries are sequestered to ensure they consider only the evidence. So no doubt the word is sequester. So I kind of messed that one up. I should have had the word out.
Sequester.
Sequester. What kind of accent does she have? It's not a verb. Sequester.
Sequester.
Sequester. So if the jury is sequestered, then what they're trying to do is again, like the document tells us, they're trying to prevent a bias, right? They want the verdict to be based upon the evidence, not based on hearsay or public opinion, the buzz on the street, what people are saying in Facebook about the murder. They want, or whatever the wrongdoing was, they want the jury to be independent of all that public bias and make a decision just based upon the evidence presented. So sometimes cases will become so public. How do you escape all of that discussion? Well, they may have to be sequestered, meaning that we're going to put you in a hotel, and when you're not in the courtroom, you're going to be in the hotel. It's like being in a bubble, like the NHL players, right? We're going to limit how much outside contact you have because we're fearful that people on the outside will try to sway your opinion about the case. Sequester. What role do citizens and organizations play in Canada's justice system? So, this is when the word's not answered. This is when you would answer the question, right? So the question is, what role do citizens and organizations play in Canada's justice system? So we want you to be aware of organizations like the John Howard Society mentioned in Chapter 2 and how they can provide service to people affected by crime. So definitely something to review in our worksheet. How do citizens and organizations participate in Canada's justice system? Specifically, John Howard Society, the Elizabeth Fry Society, and things like jury duty. Describe citizens' legal roles and their responsibilities. So these are just questions that they're trying to get you to see the big concepts of this chapter. Can you describe citizens' legal roles and their responsibilities? Evaluate the intent and the effectiveness of the YCJA. So we did that yesterday. We looked at the objectives, right? We went through the objectives yesterday, and then we looked through some data. We looked through some numbers and said, okay, has it been effective? This is the very thing that we did yesterday, almost as if by design. When was the Youth Criminal Justice Act passed by Parliament? So 2003, and we mentioned that yesterday as well. This law defines the consequences young people face for criminal offenses. That law would be the YCJA. So YCJA is going to come up a lot in this chapter, and therefore should be expected to be seen on the evaluation. Criminal Code of Canada would be the law that defines consequences that adults face. What deals with 12 to 17-year-olds in trouble with the law? Well, what age does the YCJA deal with, right? The YCJA deals with that that segment, that demographic, 12 to 17-year-olds. If you're 18, you're tried as an adult. If you're under 12, that is some serious gray area. What kind of consequences does the YCJA allow youth to face? Counseling, community service, and things like that. Youth ages 12 to 14 allows adult sentences only for those who've committed serious crimes. And it also protects your identity, so you can't be released in the media. So in what ways does the YCJA prohibit adult sentences and protect youth rights? What do the YCJA try to avoid young offenders from having? Well, they try to avoid them from having a criminal record. So that's why they end up doing other things. How else can we address, in a reasonable way, consequences of the wrongdoing? What is the usual consequence for adult offenders by the Criminal Code of Canada? Going to court. You've committed an offense, you're going to go to court, there's going to be a hearing. What type of adult sentences can adult offenders face? So if you're an adult offender, what might be some sentences? Well, in Canada, long periods of imprisonment for some crimes. And we don't have the death penalty anymore in Canada for civilians. But we do have long terms in jail. So yesterday we saw that JR ended up being tried under the YCJA, but her boyfriend was 23 and he ended up getting 25 years in jail. This allows the publication of offenders' names, creates a criminal record for most offenders, and that's what does the CCC, Criminal Code of Canada, allow adult offenders to have, and what does it create for them? So the Criminal Code of Canada does allow adult offenders to get a criminal record. What did it mean before the YCJA? Everyone was charged and went to court. Young offenders did not face consequences for a long time because the courts were often busy with many cases and offenses. Consequences did not always connect back to the people and communities. So one of the reasons why the YCJA is looking at having other options other than just simply giving you a criminal record is because the court system in Alberta is quite busy. So if they can address the wrongdoing reasonably, with reasonable consequences, and not have to take up a lot of the court's time, then that is a win. The YCJA allows, therefore, police, prosecutors, judges, volunteers, and professionals from the community to decide what happens to each young offender. So there's a group of stakeholders, right? It's not just one person. So, what factors determine the consequences? So, if there's young offenders that have committed some wrongdoings, what might determine their consequences? Their attitude. Now, is there remorse? Do they address the crime? Do they understand the crime? What are the other circumstances of this young person? Is there a history of crime? The seriousness of the crime is a factor too. Why should young offenders not be treated as adults? Might be a question that you're asking yourself during this unit. They do not understand their actions. So a 12-year-old may not be tried as an adult because maybe a 12-year-old didn't understand the consequences of their actions. Right and responsibility. Why do we have to know about the YCJA? What are the objectives of the YCJA? So we saw that yesterday. So that's reviewed there as well. So what is a jury? So at the end of the chapter, it gets more into the Criminal Code of Canada and adult justice. And if you are selected to a jury, and I was selected in March, and I'm still waiting for that trial because of COVID, it never happened. So there's a slim chance I might not be with you if they force me to serve on the jury. What is a jury? A person 14 years of age or older may choose to be tried by a judge or jury for certain serious crimes, such as assault and murder. So you might ask yourself, why would somebody pick a jury instead of a judge? Well, I guess you might see a jury as more sympathetic, or maybe you hope to be able to sway them or manipulate them. So, we're talking about juries, and the answer is 12, so the question or the information is probably going to be, how many people are on a jury, right? What do you need to be a jury duty? to be on a jury duty. Well, you need to be 18, you need to be a Canadian citizen, and you cannot be people convicted of a crime. So I guess if I want to avoid jury duty, I could go commit crime, but then I'd lose my job, so probably not worth it. If you are summoned to jury duty, what is your responsibility? I'm not sure I want to see the back of this. Is your responsibility to appear at the court on time? You must make whatever arrangements necessary for transportation, time off work, or time off classes, and rebooking appointments. So it's your job to report. It's a crime not to report, is what I've been told. What are employers expected or not expected to do? They're expected to give you time off for jury. They don't have to pay you. And that is a disadvantage because many people get paid significantly less for being on the jury than they would if they're working their other job. When will people be excused from jury duty? People are excused from jury duty only if they can demonstrate that it would cause them or others undue hardship. So as a teacher, sometimes we try to sell the fact that, I cannot be replaced that easily. There's not somebody, that can come in and take over the job seamlessly and not have a negative impact on our clientele, our students. What oath do juries swear? Obviously, only use that evidence to reach a verdict. What are the two main citizen-led organizations involved? Well, they already mentioned them on a previous slide, right? So they were the names: John Howard Society and Elizabeth Fry Society. True or false? So you got a 50-50 chance here. True or false? Advocacy groups work independently of the government. They try to solve the underlying meanings for crime. Let's go left hands up for true, right hands up for false. You gotta go with one. So true or false? Left hand is true, right hand is false. So I'm seeing some righties. Any lefties? Now I just see people jumping in on the right because a lot of people are on the right. So hopefully it's, what did I say right was?
False.
False? So hopefully it's false. It's true. Next up, they try to avoid meetings between the victims and offenders. They prevent youth who have broken the law from returning to not the community advocacy groups. Next card, they stand up for the rights of youths and adults accused of crimes. That's true as well with them. And they call for measures to improve the fairness of the justice system. That's also true about them. Elizabeth Fry Society focuses on justice issues for men, women, boys, and girls in trouble. The John Howard Society works with women and girls. This, my friends, will be false. Elizabeth Fry Society focuses on justice issues for women and girls. John Howard Society focuses on women, boys, and girls in trouble. So Elizabeth Fry focuses on just women and girls. Traditions of some Aboriginal peoples whose stems of justice can include consequences such as banishment. So this comes back to, we mentioned this term as well this week, sentencing circles, when the stakeholders get ready. So I'd suggest to you, don't memorize these terms, but something that you could do over the weekend is to come back to lesson 4, click on the Quizlets, just go through the language of the unit. You can also look at the different online study notes that we gave you at the beginning as a guideline for the unit. When we get back from our break, we are going to be looking at this worksheet. So there's an online worksheet that takes us through the textbook, takes us through chapter 2, and gets us to wrestle with the big rocks of the unit. So I printed it out for you because you guys seemed reluctant to do some of the online stuff. So I printed this out. I didn't want to be printing stuff, but it looks like you guys somehow need that, that familiarity, I guess, of printed work. So I printed this for you, and when we get back from the break, you're going to have most of the remainder of the class to work on that booklet. Before the class ends, though, I am going to be going over the evaluation a little bit that we'll see on Monday. So, just let me end this, and then we'll go outside.